So today I'm going to talk to you about, it's a study skills module that I was involved in, and a huge part of that was that the students had to keep reflective journals for that. So I'm going to talk to you about the process, about how I got involved in that, how I had input into that, how I was able to talk to the academic and share ideas around how we could help with the student transition process into third level, specifically into DCU. So I'll have to give a little bit of background to the module that we're talking about. The reflective journals that we used as a tool to get students to talk about their experience of transition was a really, really good process, I have to say. It was labour intensive from both my perspective and the academics involved, but it has given us such rich data in terms of what students really feel about coming into third level and how it differs from their prior learning. And as I say, it's helped immensely in terms of building up that relationship and that collaboration that we've been hearing about between librarians and academics. Okay, so moving on. I thought I'd give a little bit of context. This is a quotation from the student submission to what later became known as the Hunt Report, so I'll just leave it there for a second for you to read while we're sorting out the sound issues. If we needed any acknowledgement that there is such a difference in learning styles and learning behaviour between second level and third level, I think that certainly encapsulates it. And for many of our students, it feels like they're jumping into the deep end, and it's a sink or swim process a lot of times when they come into third level. So yeah, I think that was really good in terms of encapsulating what the academic that I was involved with on this felt was going on with students, certainly across her experience of teaching in the faculty she was in. So with that, we were conscious that students were coming in. They didn't have maybe the higher order level thinking skills, the critical thinking skills that we needed them to have coming from second level. So that's where it nicely segues into information literacy, because, and we've seen a few definitions already today, the ability to identify there's an information need, and the ability to bridge the gap between what's already known and what they need to know for their assignment, and knowing how to locate information and to use it efficiently. Information literacy covers all of those things, and certainly a lot of students grapple with that. As we've heard earlier, you know, there is a culture in Irish education to a large extent, and that is changing, of the sage on the stage, spoon feeding students. It's very difficult when they come into us. They're suddenly expected, like Mary was saying earlier, to reverse that whole mindset that they've been used to in terms of absorbing information and then regurgitating it back for examination. So how do they critically engage with sources of information? How do they interrogate them? How do they ask questions about them? And how are they getting those skills? Is information literacy a naturally occurring process? Who's giving it to the students? Where is it happening? Is it just an aspiration on behalf of all of us? And how can we go on to remedy that? So, in DCU certainly we have a structured approach to acknowledging that skills deficit. Our President, Bree McGrath, has initiated a programme called Generation 21, and it's a graduate attributes programme really. In that, we're very lucky that information literacy is sort of signposted as one of many key graduate attributes. So we're talking about giving the students a portable skill set that they can take ideally through all of their learning from previous learning cycles, all the way from primary level, second level, third level, going on into their careers, their employment situation, and then taking it on further even from that. So lifelong learning, that's what really we're talking about with these. And it's great for us that we have information literacy embedded in that whole framework, and it's made our jobs in the library a lot easier to do that. Interesting enough, when this has been decided upon, digital literacy was also another key attribute as well. And more we're finding information literacy and digital literacy, the lines are getting blurred between those all the time. But yeah, so that's where it was at in terms of, this is out about a couple of years now at this stage. So just to talk to you about the module that I was involved in, so it was study skills, information and study skills. This was part of a brand new programme that was coming out. It was a cross-faculty programme in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I mentioned my colleague Vera previously. She was very much aware that students needed these skills and they had to find a home somewhere in the curriculum. We started talking about what we did in the library. She could see it was a natural fit, and so it was a win-win for us. It was Claire was talking earlier about embedding skills, and it was very much that sort of partnership approach. It also helps that Vera had worked in a library before. Even though she was an academic, she could see the value of a library. She was a champion for these types of skills, so that certainly helped with it. During semester 1, I had 6 contact hours with all of the students. So that was broken down. I think it was 4 sessions, is my maths right, of 1.5 hours. And so I saw a lot of them. That was scaffolding their learning in terms of the first session. I remember we had a session with them. I gave them an assignment. I said, find information on this particular topic. Where did you go to find? Then they got into groups, discussed that, and they came back and they discussed, fed back where they had found information. So the obvious one, Google, okay? So we had a great discussion around that, and we broke that down. We were talking about Wikipedia, just getting them to talk about what sorts of tools they were used to coming in before I'd even talk to them at all about, you know, the typical resources they would find in the university library, that we were able to have that discussion, and I was able to hear where they were coming from. They were sharing it with each other, and that peer learning was invaluable. So then after that feedback process, I was able to say, okay, that's brilliant, you're on a great starting point, but these are some of the tools that you might be coming across now, and we'll discuss those in more detail. So that set the groundwork for acknowledging that they were coming in with these skills, some skills already in terms of searching for information. And it also gave me an opportunity to pinpoint how those would be different, how some of those tools, they would be building on them going forward. So, these are the module aims. At the end of it, students would come out knowing how their experiences of learning, past and present, are different. Okay, so it's really hitting the nail on the head in terms of transition, and being able to look back and see where they're coming from in terms of what they know, how they search for material. And it's not just about information literacy. This module was bigger than that. It was about critical thinking skills. It was academic writing, plagiarism awareness, how to do group work, time management, all these practical skills that students, we expect them to know coming in, but they don't necessarily know. How to be confident information seekers and users. And the third point here is very important in terms of the value of the transferable skills and how they're important for the world of work. Okay, so we have to change the direction. It's no longer enough that you're coming in and you're just repeating what you hear from your lecturer or academic. It's up to you to do the learning, like what Jerry was saying earlier, that you have got to get involved in that process. And you have got to design your learning going forward in terms of how you're going to interact with sources, how you're going to develop those skills, and how you're going to add to the knowledge that's already out there. Okay, and the last point then, reflection. Okay, so that's where the journals came in terms of giving them a tool to reflect on their learning, not just in the library. Anywhere on campus, be it remotely, the physical space doesn't matter, the processes more is what we were trying to capture. I have to say as well, before I say anything else, that we had to put a carrot on this, because as everyone knows, they're never going to do it. Well, they might do it. The more well-intentioned students might use the reflective journals to help them as an aid, but we really had to get incentivise it, so we put 20% of the module marks towards the maintenance of the journal. We looked around the literature, and Claire isn't here anymore, but we did adapt a template she had used for the use of reflective journals. So these were some of the key criteria we used to structure the inputs. So asking the students, what are their goals? What do they intend to cover during the next week? What types of activities have they been involved in? What have they actually done? What have they delivered on? Okay. List any readings that they used in that process as well. But the real meat of the journals was around point number 4, outline any problems they encountered. Okay, so obviously this was going to be a huge bulk of the entries for the journals, because it was a space for them to reflect on their genuine worries and concerns about any difficulties they were experiencing. And of course they would experience difficulties with their new environment. How they learned with regard to a particular incident, how they felt about that, their impressions about their learning, and the difference between their current learning and previous learning. Okay, so that if they were able to map the types of learning they were comfortable with to date, and then to draw parallels between it and the new types of learning they were being asked to engage in. That would certainly help them with that process. And then for us as well, it was important, obviously reflection is huge and we're hearing it everywhere. The students could reflect on their experience, how do they cope, any strategies they had in place, and what would they do differently next time. And then the last point, reflecting on reflecting. How is it helping them to discover new things about themselves? Okay, so these types of skills are important, the self-reflection, looking around their environment, identifying new things that are out there, and learning from that. And that's obviously going to help in terms of going forward into their careers as well. So the methodology we applied, obviously this is highly qualitative. We gave the students the option if they wanted to type up their journal entries or if they wanted to write them up by hand. We had 30, there was about 40, I can't remember the exact, it was about 38, 39 students in the module, because it was a brand new module, didn't have full numbers at the time, but 35 of them were happy to participate, but they all elected to handwrite their entries, which I thought was very interesting. It was like it was more personal because they were handwriting them in. You know the way if you're typing something you have to really, it's almost like an extra filter. Now maybe I'm just an old-fashioned dinosaur, but you know, you're trying to concentrate on how you word things maybe, and it mightn't be as fluid, but they all chose to handwrite them. The ethics around it, obviously this was being assessed, but we only went asked them for their consent to use the journal entries after they had been given their marks. So there was no question of a conflict of interest here, and they were happy to participate. We ran it by the University Ethics Committee and they signed off on it as well. We used a grounded theory approach, so went through every single entry of every single journal. And these were all handwritten, so you can imagine the time that took. And we were categorising every single entry to fit it into a theme. Okay, so at the start we didn't know necessarily what those themes were. We were letting the journals talk to us. So we coded each entry, we made sure that every single thing that everyone was saying was captured in one of those themes where possible. And we came up with 15 categories. So the main ones of those were, well, academic writing, using the library, making friends, that was important. A lot of students were discussing that personal, social side to the learning process, and how that impacts on their learning. And I think Mary was talking earlier about getting the brainy student to help them with their learning, and all that peer learning that goes on and that social interaction, that you can't isolate that from the learning process. Looking at citing and referencing, plagiarism, all those traditional study skills as well. So we did categorise them into those various areas. So I'm just going to go through maybe a few of the journal findings. We had hundreds and hundreds, but I'll just pick out a few. So the first one, coping with a new environment. I'm also adjusting to the new style of teaching that university life brings. It's very different from the teaching style of secondary school. Okay, so there it is in black and white. Not that we needed to, we knew that already, but it's good to get the students to reflect on that and to capture it. Because obviously within the journal entries they were thinking about how they can improve on that, identify the skills gap, you know, and notice the difference between the two. Independent learning, it's no longer the rote learning, it's autonomous learning, and so they were able to, by stating that it was different, they were able to come up with ideas and strategies for maybe helping them bridge that gap between what they've known to now to what they need to know now. This one here is an interesting quote. I'll just let you read it for a second. Okay, so really around, not that we needed any evidence, learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. Okay, so a lot of our students have got jobs to maintain, they might have family commitments. There was a mature student cohort on this module in the whole, though many of them were the traditional students coming straight from school. But that, you know, we need to be more cognizant of that students are juggling a lot of things. Learning doesn't just happen with a head in a book. It happens, you know, running out to the car, standing in a queue, you might be on your phone, you might be doing their learning there through your mobile, whatever it may be. So that there is pressures on their time, and that we need to be more aware of that and to maybe facilitate that. I don't have the easy answer to that, but just an awareness of that will help certainly. New types of learning, so researching for an assignment. And we came across this a lot. Students were paranoid that they weren't being told what to learn, what to study, what to read, and so there was this huge paranoia around, oh my God, am I getting everything I need to get for this? And there's this insecurity element there as well, and then worrying about the types of information. It's almost like they're being inundated with so much information. How do they decipher the good from the bad, and just working their way through that process, and the worry that's involved in that. Being proactive. Okay, so. Yes, we may tell them that there's study skills workshops on, we might tell them the library's running a session on plagiarism at lunchtime, but the better students will know that themselves, and they'll be proactive, and they'll make steps towards trying to improve their skills. And again, recognition that writing is so different to their school essays. The value of the journal itself. This is really good for us to see that they weren't just doing this as a fruitless exercise, that it was actually helping them with the whole learning process. It sort of makes them take stock and look at what their goals are for the forthcoming week. What do they need to do to achieve those goals or those outcomes? Do they need to do more work on a particular subject? Do they need to talk to a tutor? Do they need to get more of their peer students involved in helping them understand a particular thing? And getting them to document that process actually helps them have a blueprint and give them an action plan for actually trying to fulfill those aims. So after we looked at the journal entries and we had written up the study, we went back a few months later and we asked some of the students to reflect, now that they were finished with that module, to reflect on the whole process of reflection. And this, as this quote here demonstrates, hugely stressful time. Okay. Main source of stress for me personally was not knowing what was expected of you. Okay, and that's a huge thing for them. They don't know what's expected. I think what we need to be more cognizant of is to talk to students about different types of assessments that are out there. And here's an example perhaps of a really good assessment versus a bad one, obviously anonymised. But those practical learning tools will help them an awful lot in terms of their learning. If not enough of that is happening, they're totally in the dark and they're not sure what they need to do to remedy that. And feeling of, again, being lost at sea. Stress was a huge thing in these journal entries. We had 146 coded entries just to stress alone, and that was just from those 35 students that I mentioned. So it came up again and again. Significant finding. So the question to ask, are we providing adequate supports? Are we scaffolding the learning experience and the supports that are needed for that at the right time? I think there is sometimes a tendency to front load all the support at the start of the semester in first year, and it's too much for them. Students can't take all that in, like anybody can't take all that information in at the start. We've tons of orientation. It's about looking at the first semester, it's about looking at the first year, it's about looking at all of the years within a programme and looking to see where interventions should fit into that. So for example, myself and Vera sat down at the start of the year and we said, when are the crisis points for the students in terms of needing to have a session on citing and referencing, for example? And that really only came into effect when they were about to write up their essay. There's no point in telling students about that at the start of the year because it's going in one ear and out, that they've too much going on. And so it's about standing back. And I try in my own training at the start of the semester to not take students until at least week 2 or 3 because there's far too much going on. So it's just a little bit of thinking around that in terms of how we spread out the support. Also, many students aren't necessarily familiar with the supports that are out there. Okay, so we think we're doing great putting it all up on a website, but we're not talking to them all the time about the supports that are out there. They're learning from their peers an awful lot as well. And if we can facilitate that, that's brilliant. So group work is crucial to that. Peer learning from each other is very important. It's like flipping the classroom, getting them involved, getting them to take ownership around the learning, getting them to share it with each other, be it on a discussion forum or be it in a class group activity. Are we listening to the students? Where does the listening to student voice happen? Does it happen? This particular module was really I suppose, a luxurious, if I can use that word, experience for students, in the sense that Vera was very much on board. She met with each student a number of times. She had formal meeting times in her office. I understand that is not doable for a lot of people, because we've all got pressures on our time. In terms of a lot of academics I've met with, a lot can't dedicate all that time, and it does take time. And so I also offered in the library one-to-one consultations as well, and they did take us up on it. I appreciate that isn't always possible, but that type of feedback, that type of knowing there's a place to go to, if you have a query, is huge for students when they're coming in first year, because maybe there is peer pressure, maybe they don't want to stick up their hand in a session and say, I really don't know where I'm going with this, give me a hand with this. So being able to knock on a door and talk to someone on a one-to-one basis is really helpful as well. So just in terms of the learning that myself and Vera got from this, I asked Vera, the academic, later on about how she found the whole experience in terms of the maintenance of the journals, and she said basically they provided the rationale for implementing change into that study skills module. Okay, so all the time for us to learn from the students as well, so that it's not just us, this is the way it's done, we're learning all the time. We need to hear what the student voice is, we need to hear what their concerns are, we need to tailor our modules accordingly, and to think about the timing of those as well. Curriculum design as well, being very explicit with students, you know, the crunch points or the crisis points throughout. And when I say crisis points, for them it might be when their assessment is due in, okay? So to sort of get them thinking around, that assessment is coming up in 3 weeks. Have you started your lit review? Have you started this? Have you done that? And to give them some sort of a time frame for that and a framework to work towards for it. So being able to have a flexible curriculum that will allow you to change things as well is hugely beneficial. And so we gained learning from that as well. So just to really sum up, I've already covered this, but is the curriculum flexible enough to support the student voice? I think for academics and for all support staff to think about that. It shouldn't just be coming from one academic or lecturer. This whole support network needs to come from the whole institution. So we're talking about student support, other people have mentioned ISS, you're talking about academics, lecturers, library staff. All of these stakeholders have got to be involved in terms of capturing the student voice and harnessing that to improve the learning for the student as well. And for transition to be viewed as a long-term process. It is a process, it's not, this is something that happens in the first week of the student's semester, that it is an ongoing process. And like everyone's been saying, and it's very heartening to hear about, you know, the life cycle from when a student starts in primary school all the way through, from when they graduate into their academic, their careers and onwards as well. Thank you.